customer identity and access management evolve, right? So some definitions are in order, especially for people who are more focused on workforce identity and access management. What we see is the workflows, the onboarding, the life cycle, the authentication, authorization flows are very well defined on the workforce side versus customer identity, where you have a lot of fragmentation. You have obviously custom development that people do. You also have fragmented identity in the sense that you have a stack per application, and each stack is doing its own customer identity. And then as things are evolving, you are seeing that instead of line of business managing customer identities, sometimes it makes sense to have a central team manage that versus how it has been traditionally done, right? But there is a lot of commonality. I will talk about where we see the overlap and merging in some cases of customer identity and workforce identity. So why is it important these days, right? As you can see, right, expectations are rising. When people are interacting with Amazon.com, or they're interacting with Google.com or even Microsoft.com, right? They don't have different identities for all the services each of these companies offers, right? They're used to this single authentication, and then my session is valid, and now I can buy stuff, I can order servers, I can do whatever I want from all these, right? And these expectations continue to rise. So this is what we call the age of the consumer, right? Where in terms of workforce, you can dictate a lot of things. You can dictate, hey, these are the applications you will use, this is the device you will use it from, this is how you will log in. In the consumer world, that doesn't hold true, right? You may have people trying to access things from however they want, wherever they want, whatever is convenient for them, right? And you have to do all of that in a very secure manner, right? Otherwise, you lose trust. And another big trend we see is, in the older days, right, around 2000 timeframe, right, focus mostly was on websites. People were accessing things through their browser on their PCs, right? But over time, this has evolved from going from PCs to laptops, to mobile devices, and now even smart speakers and all sorts of devices. And it's not just websites they are accessing applications. So beyond just securing websites, you have to secure your mobile applications. Beyond just your mobile applications, you have APIs that need to be secured, right? So customer identity is rapidly evolving, and it is happening outside the traditional workforce-oriented approach that companies have taken in the past. So you are seeing that companies are realizing that, hey, they have been behind in modernizing customer identity, and they are facing a lot of friction when those kind of use cases pop up. So for example, if I want to provide my customers with a unified experience, it's not that easy to provide if I have fragmentation in my backend, right? I cannot get a 360-degree view of a customer because some of my applications use identity system X, some of them use identity system Y, right? Other trends we are seeing, there's a big push towards identity as a service. So you are seeing some push towards replacing homegrown systems as well as more legacy on-premise systems, right? But in the end, what we are seeing in the last few years is the business is taking a more proactive approach around customer identity and access management. Whereas with workforce, they have been hands-off. They rely on IT teams to do that. Here, the chief digital officer, chief revenue officer, chief customer officer, they play a much bigger role in driving these initiatives. And if you look at this quote from Forrester, right, to even launch these products successfully, to iterate on these products successfully, right, the customer insights are key. And you get those customer insights when you have a unified view of your customers. Without that, it is really hard to even analyze across how is your product being used, right? So being able to provide this whole mobile optimized omni-channel experience, and more what we are seeing is the use cases are evolving, jumping from online to offline in retail world. So for example, we have customers in retail where, yes, they have a single sign-on through Okta or a tool like that for their website. They have done a good job with their mobile authentication, but they are saying when a customer walks into the physical retail store, why am I authenticating them in a different manner, right? Why am I asking them for a membership ID and those kind of things? Why am I not using the same identity when they are interacting with me through a kiosk or any of those forms, right? So you need basically an identity system which supports all those. Other big things, and this is more of a clarification, customer identity systems are not a replacement for all these, right? You will still have a CRM system. You will still have a master data management system. You still will have a marketing platform. But what companies' strategic customers are realizing is that they can use a customer identity platform to tie all these together, right? So all these different identities that your transactions are fragmented across your CRM system, your MDM system, right? a solid identity system can be a platform that lets you link all those identities, right? So that's a very empowering concept that a lot of smart customers are realizing, that we can roll these things out, and we don't need to replace all these systems. We can just link those identities with a master identity platform. The other big trends we are seeing are historically, businesses have chosen different solutions for workforce IAM and customer IAM, right? And this despite there being some overlap, right? I mean, if you look at the core functions, you need directory services, you need SSO, you need opt-in MFA, you need password management, right? So there is some overlap, but as you can see, right, there is a lot of differences as well. But more and more, companies are realizing that, they do need a single identity and access management program and a single identity platform to be able to solve all these use cases. And why is that, right? If you look at this example, so we have a customer, they're a mid-sized company, and obviously they solved their workforce identity use cases by having a single platform. And it says Okta here, but it can be another system as well. So authenticate by Active Directory and give access and provide MFA to cloud applications, right? Pretty straightforward. But then when they were launching these business applications, right, which involved, a hospital app, a donor app, registry app, these were disparate apps built by different groups within that company, right? Some were running on-prem, some were running in Azure, some were running in a multi-cloud AWS environment, right? So how do you tie all these together? And the reality is, it's not just the hospital, it's not just the researchers or a general public that is accessing them, it's also their workforce. So which is it? Is it a customer identity app or is it a workforce, right? That delineation becomes very hard. And if you throw in the APIs in the mix, right, where all your applications need to call backend APIs, how do they authenticate? What Gartner is finding and what we are finding is that delineation is getting less and less demarcated, and more customers want a single platform, so they don't have to have their developers solve the identity problem differently. They don't need to solve an identity problem for workforce differently than hospitals, than general public, right? And similar examples apply in the case of a bank or another institution where you go into the store, right, and your staff is pulling up data or applications on behalf of the user, impersonating them. How do you solve those? So again, having multiple identity systems, be it workforce or customer, or multiple customer identity systems, that fragmentation leads to a lot of lost time. So these are the biggest roadblocks we see around successful digital transformation, right? Inconsistent login experiences across brand. This turns consumers off, right? If you're competing with a company like Amazon, they don't have this problem, right? Amazon is not asking you, oh, you are trying to do X on my platform, let me give you another login ID. It never happens, right? That is the expectation end users have when they're interacting with your businesses, that I have a single identity, I have a single passport, I should be able to use that across the board without having to re-register and all, right? And then the other thing is they expect your data to be secured, right? So again, if you don't have fragmentation in your platform, you are on a consolidated platform, you reduce your risk surface, you reduce your exposure to data breaches. A big trend we are seeing is around GDPR, for example, compliance-related requirements. You have requirements coming from US all over the world, right? So how do you make sure that a person has full control over what data they are sharing with you? And again, if you have fragmentation in your platforms, right, it becomes very hard to give people an option to opt out securely. Then I'll talk a little bit more about architecture issues as well. I'll give you a case study we did with MLB.com, where they were able to launch this service very quickly. But you have had this issue where if you have friction in your identity platform, you get launch delays, right? Your teams cannot roll out services because they cannot compromise security, and then an outdated architecture does not help in that case. So goals for relevant customer identity, the best companies out there that are building these experiences, they simplify it, right? The best way to authenticate a user is to not prompt them, right, if we can, right? Give control to personal information and do it at scale so that you are not worried about going from 1 million to 10 million to 100 million identities. The platform should take care of it for you. And your developers should be free. Rather than working with multiple systems, they should be able to utilize a single system to launch applications and services as quickly as possible. So, I see this a lot, right, where, when we visit a company, they, for the most part, right, there's good adoption on identity as a service on the workforce side, but there is a lot of still some, hesitation around, hey, this is our crown jewels. We want to basically, host it or control that data, right? The reality is, I mean, in identity as a service scenario as well, you do control the data. It is your data. It's not owned by, whoever is providing the service. But the benefits, outweigh the issues that, the legacy platforms cause. What are those issues, right? If you look at those platforms, they are fragmented. What do I mean by fragmented? At the most basic level, these legacy platforms, right, they did one-offs. So you had directory services, which was a one-off. And then you had authentication services, which were separate. And then when you needed MFA, that was yet another product stack to do, right? And then when you talk about interdependencies between these capabilities, where if you want to do feature X, you have to upgrade Y and Z, you had this whole basically slow down chain reaction in your environment where, oh, I cannot get to this point until I upgrade my environment X, Y, and Z and bring them up to the same level, then I can do the things I want to do for business. So that's what we mean by fragmentation, right? That these upgrades that you had, the high integration costs, the scalability and reliability issues that you had, right? Those are the things that basically kind of put these legacy vendors behind, and that's why you see a big shift towards identity as a service, right? So again, like I said, we have examples of banks, we have examples of healthcare, we have example of government customers now feeling much more comfortable than they used to utilize identity as a service, even though it resides outside the perimeter. But the benefits it gives you far outweigh any of the negatives that you may have. So what should an identity service be able to provide to you, right? Personalized customer experience, right? That's table stakes. You should be able to access any application, any service, any API that you want from running on any platform in the world in a seamless manner without reprompting the user for authentication or registration. You should be able to launch services very quickly, right? Because you're not managing the infrastructure, you're not hosting the environment, you should be able to do that. With a centralized platform, you have a single pane of glass through which you can manage your users, your groups, your permission, and be able to run it on a service that is highly redundant and reliable, and you don't need to worry about scale. Tomorrow, if you acquire a company, right, you're not saying, oh, I will take 1 year or 2 years to scale up my environment to meet those use cases, right? So this is an example of some key capabilities to look for. Again, it says Okta, but you will see there's a lot of other services out there that offer it. But I would caution you, right, there is a difference between a pure identity as a service versus mostly on-prem software, which is forklifted, right? So watch out for that, obviously, to see what you're getting into. But key capabilities around a directory itself, which can host millions of identities and auto-scale for you, right? A directory where you can build a profile of a user over time. So a big trend we are seeing these days is you cannot really throw a 30-field form in front of a user and ask them to register. That's a lot of friction. So you want progressive profiling capability, which means at the touch points they are interacting with your company, be it retail, be it online subscribing to a newsletter, you collect data at that point, which may be email to start with, and then later on allow them personalized first name, last name. And when the time comes, collect the address and others. So rather than doing it at one big go, right, you're doing progressive profiling. And then after the directory has been built out, right, you can synchronize the capabilities that you need both to and from the directory. You can have authentication, you can have SSO, social authentication for scenarios where it makes sense. People don't need to have a credential for your website. Passwordless is a big trend, not just on workforce side, but also on customer identity. Especially if you think about customer identity use cases, somebody may be coming to your website only to do their taxes once a year. There is no chance they will remember that password, right? So why even bother with that password flow? Why not send a magic link or send a push notification on their phone, give them a passwordless experience from the get-go? Adaptive MFA, as was mentioned earlier, right, all those capabilities around risk-based authentication, risk scoring, they apply to customer identity as well. You have companies that are providing tools that you can leverage there. And then as far as developer experience is concerned, right, this is very important. A big trend we have seen in the last 2-3 years is because of some of the frustrations developers have with the legacy approach, right, where the systems may be on-prem or they're not just up to date, they may go and do their own thing, right? Which means they sign up for a service themselves or they start doing their own identity, right? And the way to win over that audience for the IT security staff is, right, to rely on a service which has a developer interface directly, because developers like self-service for a lot of things. They don't want to be told, oh, come to me and stand in a queue and then I'll give you information. There should be self-service SDKs and libraries available so they can do that, right? You can obviously have OIDC, SAML support, protocol support, but you need wrappers in pretty much every language out there to win over that crowd. So that's a big trend we are seeing, that if you want to win over that audience, right, you need to have that flexibility in the platform. Then if you go in deeper, you have authorization policies. That's also something that should be part of your platform, and being able to integrate with other services. And then you see, as part of this whole identity stack, I put some things in italics, and these are things that you should look for that either the core product has, but a lot of them don't. So you want to find out, hey, how well does this platform play in this space with other vendors who may offer some of these niche capabilities around identity proofing, which is verifying who you really are, as well as outside risk scoring and those kind of things, right? So you are looking for open platform. And then last but not least, to win over the business, right, you need very deep marketing integration. So you need integration for compliance purposes with consent management systems, but also you need them for preference management and analytics, because marketing teams need data. They need to know how the product is used, how the website is used, what are people responding to, what are they not responding to. So a system that can give you that unified flow across, hey, the user authenticated from this place, and then this is their flow across all my applications, that's really powerful and highly, highly valuable. So I'll give you one example, right? So these are some of the customers that today use identity as a service for customer identity. I'll give you a deep dive into one of them that modernized their website using, identity as a service. In this case, it was Okta. So, MLB, Major League Baseball, has 60 million baseball fans. And they basically interact with MLB properties, which includes websites, mobile apps, and even kiosks. Across, especially during the launch day. So a little bit of history, right? So previously, MLB.com was running on technology basically provided by BAM, so Baseball Advanced Media, and there was some M&A activity, and Disney acquired that. So MLB was left with a choice to do, what's next for them, which is to build an identity system. And the choice they had was to build it in-house, right? Similar to the previous system they had, which is to store user identities and manage and scale them in-house, or to use identity as a service. And the reason behind it was primarily they did not want to be in the business of hosting and securing identities because they were in the business of baseball. And this applies to pretty much every business out there. If you look at it, identity is really a core of that company. You are either a financial company or a healthcare company or a government, right? So it's best to, rely on people who are experts in those areas. And it was a pretty aggressive timeline. Their goals were to have a modern experience, right? Speed to market was very important because their launch date doesn't change, right? It's every year at the same time, all the teams come and everybody is hitting MLB.com. So they had about like a 9-month runway, right? And the goal was to provide a modern experience and scale and reliability. So with Okta's help, we migrated 32 million users into our identity store. Now, that's not the only pattern to follow. A lot of customers, they keep their existing identity stores, so that's always an option. And identity as a service capabilities can be used in a piecemeal fashion, so you're not doing these bulk migrations, but you can also do it in a phased manner. But in their case, basically, about 10,000 users per minute were migrated over, including their password, so that nobody had to reset their password. As these people were logging in on the launch date, basically they had no difference in experience. Their experience was exactly the same as it was last year because their password did not change. And within 9 months, basically, they were able to go live, right? So these numbers are very difficult to pull off if it's not identity as a service, right? You would have time to provision containers or servers or virtual machines. You will need time to test it. You will need time to do load testing, reliability testing, and all those things, right? So very, very hard to pull these things off in that world. Here are some of the stats, right? And we work with them to auto-scale the service. So as basically the peak authentications were hitting, we actually were a little bit more conservative. We didn't see as much as we were expecting, but still, the identity, the service part of it scaled pretty nicely and gave them this successful launch date, right? So again, the idea is, right, we can be your partner, right? A service company can be your partner. And by offloading a lot of those things that you tend to do with your legacy systems, right? Like I said, it is your data. You're not giving your data. MLB is not giving their data over to Okta. They still own that data. It's just that we do a good job of running the software we have built rather than shipping it to you, right? So if you ask me fundamentally what's different, right, that is what's different, that you go from one situation to another. A couple of other quick examples of retail scenarios, right? So T-Mobile is a good example. Seattle-based company, large footprint worldwide, or I'm sorry, North America, around the retail store specifically. So the idea was that as they did launches of iPhones and Samsung phones, right, they would get these long queues in their retail environment, and then people would come in, and the workforce had to pull up their iPads and then look up inventory and do provisioning of those phones. And all of that involved about 2 or 3 different types of logins, right? So this is a very simple scenario. So this is not really customer identity. It's their retail employees, but they were not in their AD, they were not in their corporate LAN, right? So kind of a hybrid use case. So you may also see use cases like this where it's not really B2E and it's not really B2C, but it's kind of somewhere in the middle, right? So in their case, Okta became the repository for all their retail store employees specifically, right? And what it allowed them to do is to have this seamless experience. So as a person is coming in, right, they were shaving seconds off of transactions times, right? So the lines are shorter now. So there is a real business impact when people can access what they need to access quickly. There is a real business impact in terms of how quickly they can serve, how many customers they can serve, and those, right? One last example, MGM, M-Life loyalty program, so 8 million plus consumer. So if you look at MGM, if you go to Las Vegas, right, you stay in Aria, you stay in Bellagio, you stay in MGM Grand, right? These are all different properties. They're owned by the same parent company, MGM, but they used to have their own identity systems. They used to have, some of them had SQL Server, some of them had LDAP, some of them had AD for customer identities, right? Even though they're owned by the same company. With them, the challenge was, how can you have a unified store and give users a seamless experience? So if you went from one property to another, right, you were still able to access them without getting authenticated again. So that way they were able to cross-sell, upsell, do those things without prompting the user again. By again relying on identity as a service, very quickly within a matter of few months, right, they were able to do this migration of a consolidated user store, a single view of the customer, and then give you this option of, hey, do you want to allow them to visit all your properties across these different sub-brands through service very quickly. This is, again, something really hard to do if you have legacy and on-prem systems. So I hope this was useful. I'll open it up for questions, right? And like I said, there are a lot of platforms which do this, right? But when you're looking into a platform, I would highly advise, right, look at the whole breadth of the use cases you have, because it's not just workforce, right? It's also about your retail employees. It's also about your contractors, people who are not today in your systems, right? And obviously, it is also about customers. And how can you have a platform which can serve all these needs across your applications, infrastructures, and APIs in a seamless manner so you can launch applications and services quickly?